Hello, and welcome to the Young Writers Hymn Writing Series. This is Lesson 11 Poetry with a Focus on Writing with Rhythm. One of the things we need to do first is define some terms. In particular, we want to think about what we mean when we say rhythm or meter, because these terms can have different meanings in different contexts. And in fact, I will probably use them interchangeably at times, but we'll try to keep clear what it is that we're talking about. So, definitions for meter. In music, the meter is also what we might call the time signature, and it's the number of beats per measure. So a 4/4 time signature has 4 quarter notes. A 3/4 time signature has 3 quarter notes. 6/8 is 6/8 notes, 9/8 is 9/8 notes, and so forth. That's not really how we'll be using it in our discussion about lyrics, but it will come into play later when you're bringing your lyrics to music, but that will be outside of the scope of what we're talking about with writing lyrics. Meter can also mean the number of syllables per line. For example, in Abide with Me, the first line has 10 syllables, the second line has 10, third line has 10, and fourth line has 10. And that's true in each verse. In Almost Persuaded, we have 9, 9, 6, 6, 6, and 4. Then you also have multiple songs that can have the same meter in this fashion. And what has been done with some of those is to take lines from those songs that are topically related and also have the same meter and put those together to what may be a different tune from any of the original songs. In the Pilgrim Song medley or composite song, there are lyrics from All the Way My Savior Leads Me, Father, Hear the Prayer We Offer, Tarry With Me, and When We All Get to Heaven. And because they have the same meter, and they also have what I will call the same rhythm or the same poetic meter, they work together with the same tune. And of course, there are many more combinations. Some of these combinations are so common that they have abbreviations or they have names like common meter or long meter and so forth. That's a whole thing that can be studied and delved into. But what we want to take away right now is just that the idea of meter can include just the number of syllables per line. One place where this comes in handy is in your writing or in your research of songs. You can look up other songs by their meter, and hymnary.org has resources for that. So if you go to hymnary.org and you go to the search and you click on advanced search, it gives you many different fields that you can search by. And you can type in your meter, for example, 8787, and do a search just for songs with that meter. And you'll come up with a lot of results. Some of them, well, many of them you may not be familiar with, but some of them will be. And so if we look at other songs that have the same meter as Pilgrim Song medley, we see a lot of results there. And this is not necessarily the most frequently encountered meter. So that's something that you can use. And the way that you can leverage this when you're writing lyrics is to then take that, find songs with the same meter as you're targeting, and then you can use that music as a background for your writing. So you can have that in your head as you're thinking about how these words fit into a song and not just into a poem. Not all songbooks or hymnals have this feature, but some do. The Psalms, Hymns, and Spiritual Songs songbook has a hymnal index that is by meter. And so you can look up songs in that same way. It's an index rather than a search tool like you would have on hymnary.org. And one example of a book that's like that is a book by Matt Bassford, which is an arrangement of all of the Psalms from the Bible, worshiping with the Psalms. And what he has done there is just written out arrangements of psalms to set these songs to meters that can then be sung to well-known tunes. For example, his arrangement of Psalm 1 is in a 6/10s meter, and that is the same as the tune called Finlandia, which is the tune to Be Still My Soul. So if you know the tune of Be Still My Soul, you can sing his arrangement of Psalm 1 to that tune. But you can also look at this meter and go to the index of this book and find other songs that have the same meter. This doesn't show that 610s meter, but there's a metrical index, and it's a common meter. You can see all the songs that have that same meter. Not all of them will have the same rhythms, that you can't always switch around the melodies, but if you're going to be able to, they will have the same meter. Meter can also refer to poetic meter, and this is more of a technical term when it comes to poetry. The way that poetic meter is defined is first by what's called the foot or the cadence. And so the foot is the smallest unit of that meter. And there's all these different combinations. Here are just 2 and 3 syllable feet, which are the most common ways to think about that. So what we have in the first 4 sections or the first 4 feet are different accents. So the X is a soft accent and the slash is a heavy accent. For example, believe has that soft, hard accent. Jesus has the accent on the first syllable. Almost, it could be like believe, almost, or it could be almost, or both could be accented. Almost persuaded kind of has an accent on both of those. And so you can see that sometimes words aren't just one thing, but whenever you put them into a song, put them into a rhythm, they will adopt that emphasis or that foot, and so forth. You can go on down to see different types. Sometimes it's not just one word, it might be a phrase. Then we take multiple feet and combine them to be a meter. One of the most well-known ones, I suppose, because it's about the only one I could have named before doing this research, was iambic pentameter. So what does that mean? You have the iambic foot, which is believe, da-da, and it has a soft and then a hard or accented syllable. And if you have 5 of those, or pentameter, then you would have 5, da-da, 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 da-da. That would be iambic pentameter or pentameter. And so that's how the terminology works. And honestly, I'm not going to refer to this much, but this is something you could get into more if you want to. But the point here is that's how rhythm works, or that's how meter works. Whether we have names that we remember, that is how it works. Now, you can mix it. It's not like every line has to be just 1 foot repeated a certain number of times. You can mix them together. In almost persuaded, that first line has almost persuaded, now to believe. Or depending on what you do just on that first word, it could be almost and not both accented. But this is a way of notating what your accents are, and that's very helpful when you have a line and you have decided this is the rhythm and this is the meter that I want to have. You can define that for a word that you have not identified. You've got a blank for a word, and not just any word can go in there. Maybe you need a word or a phrase that's 3 syllables in the middle of your line. Well, not just any 3 syllables could fit there either. It may need a certain accent pattern. So this is a way of notating that, what that accent needs to be. And it's also a way of checking if the words that you have used do create the same meter from verse to verse or from line to line if you're trying to keep a repetitive line-to-line pattern. Now let's talk about musical rhythm. Poetic meter tends towards certain rhythms. A certain poetic meter will fit with certain rhythms. So if you have 10 syllables, for example, what that might be is 3 sets of 3, so 9 syllables, followed by a 10th syllable that is the downbeat of the next measure. So a 9/8 rhythm, or a 9/8 time signature, would be da 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 da, and that would give you 10 syllables. So it might work out that a 10 syllable meter, poetic meter, fits with a 9/8 time signature. Or it might be a 12/8. Da 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 da, and that fits into a 12/8 time signature. But any given poetic meter can fit with a variety of rhythmic solutions. Not everything is just constant da 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 da. There's a lot of variety in rhythm that's possible with music. And a given poetic meter or a given syllable count can fit with a wide variety of rhythms and even time signatures, although some will tend to lend themselves toward certain time signatures and certain rhythms. Typically, what you're going for is just to listen. What do the words tell you? What kind of rhythm do the words have if you're just speaking them? But if we look at just a 10-syllable line, like the first line of Abide with Me, abide with me, fast falls the eventide. That's where the accents fall. If we look at the rhythm, I've kind of indicated it here sort of like Morse code. Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. That's the rhythm for the tune that goes with Abide with me. God of our fathers is also a 10-syllable first line. God of our fathers, whose almighty hand. Be thou my vision is very steady with a long note on the last one, also 10 syllables. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. This chart shows the accents or the poetic meter, not broken down into feet, but just all strung together for each of these. And what you'll notice are some similarities and some dissimilarities. In particular, with Abide with me and God of our fathers, the last half is similar with /x/x/. The first half is a little bit different, but not significantly so. All of the lines start with a heavy accent syllable. And then there's just a little difference between Abide with me and God of our fathers on the second syllable, and then again on the fifth. But if you look into the lyrics, and probably if you look into each verse and their lyrics for that first line, there's not a heavy emphasis or a heavy de-emphasis on those syllables that differ a little bit. And those tunes can be swapped for each other without too much difficulty. We'll come back to that a little bit more later. Now I want to talk about notation methods. How do we write down our rhythm? If we're writing down words, this is a critical skill or a technique to learn, especially if you struggle to feel rhythms, to hear them. With these notation methods, as long as you know what they look like on paper, then you can make sure to align your syllables, align your words with the notation or with the rhythms and with the meters. One of the methods you can use is just to use a word processor, just typing it out. Microsoft Word, bolding or underlining accented syllables, changing their color, however you want to indicate those accented syllables. A great advantage of this is that it's easy to do while you're writing, and it just reads normally. The words are all lined up like you could read it. It's easy to read, and it's easy to change accents. You just Control B to make them bold, or Control B to unbold a syllable or a word or what have you. Or if you prefer to underline or italics, it's Control U or Control I. You can do something similar if you prefer to just write by hand. You can do the same thing. You can underline, you can circle syllables, or use a different color. But if you're writing in pencil, which is probably advisable, you can just underline or circle the accented syllables. One disadvantage of doing it in this method is that the syllable count is not visually obvious, because the width of letters is different, the number of spaces in a line is different. You may wind up with two lines of the same number of syllables, but they're different lengths because of the length of the spelling of the words. And so it's not a visual indicator of what the lengths of the lines are. What this does is when you want to compare verse to verse and get those meters lined up with each other and matching as they should be, the comparison is tedious. You end up doing a lot of counting on your fingers, and that only helps with the number of syllables. If you're trying to match the actual meter and the foot, the accented syllables, it gets difficult. You have to do a lot of bouncing back and forth, or write it out to the side using that X/ notation or whatever you want, something that's quick and easy to distinguish between two characters. But using that notation is useful for using rhymezone.com, which is a great tool for writing lyrics in poetry. You can search for rhyming words, but you can also search for synonyms, and that's useful in the middle of lines where you have a particular meaning that you need to put in the middle of a line, but that meaning also needs to fit a form. And what you can do is restrict your search to a certain meter. And that could be a 1, 2, 3, or 4 syllable meter or foot. And I'm looking for a synonym for declare. And I need to have that light, heavy, light accent, X/X. And so click on that, and then it narrows down your search, and you won't waste your time looking at other words that won't fit where you want them to go, or that would be a force fit, and you end up accenting the wrong syllables when you sing it, and it sounds awkward and is distracting. An example of looking at different meters and different accents can start when you're first setting up your song and deciding what meter you should use. In a song I wrote called His Steadfast Love Endures Forever, I looked at multiple translations, and I wanted to figure out what phrasing I wanted to use for that key phrase that I would be repeating throughout the song. And that phrasing significantly determines the meter and the rhythm even. In the ESV, we have, for his steadfast love endures forever. And that's actually what I ended up going with. The rhythm was like, for his steadfast love endures forever. Or forever, holding that out to indicate this is forever. You can see the meter there is XX/X/X/X/X, a 10-syllable meter. King James is, for his mercy endureth forever. And you can hear how that just automatically goes into this kind of triplicate feel. For his mercy endureth forever, with ending on a 2-syllable accent. But still 10 syllables, but significantly different from for his steadfast love endures forever. New King James takes the eth out of endureth, for his mercy endures forever. And again, you can hear just the accents pull out a rhythm. That one is only 9 syllables though, so it changes from the other two. The New American Standard is 11. It changes loving kindness and everlasting, for mercy endures forever. I'll read it straight and then I'll read it with rhythm. For his loving kindness is everlasting. Or, for his loving kindness is everlasting. That's a good rhythm. It feels good. It's natural to sing. That's not the rhythm I was going for, or that worked well with my song. But you can just see how this word choice and even this translation choice as the source for that song changes the rhythm, changes the meter. Another notation method that I've never seen anyone else use unless I showed it to them was to use a table or a spreadsheet. And this is my favorite way when I'm really getting down into the nitty-gritty of getting the rhythms and meter locked in. And rhyme to an extent, but especially the rhythm and the meter is a very powerful tool. And what do I mean by using a spreadsheet to write lyrics? Might look something like this. And this is for that same song, for his steadfast love endures forever. There are a couple of advantages to this, and I'll show you in just a second. I'll demonstrate using this table, or using a spreadsheet, a table in a spreadsheet, to manage the lyrics. But one of the things that it does is allows you to switch between verse grouping and line grouping. In other words, as it's shown here, you have verse 1, the lines are in order, line 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then I inserted a blank line, and then you have verse 2, line 1, 2, 3, and 4. But what I might want to do is check verse 1, line 1, and verse 2, line 1, and see, do those match up? And so I can rearrange that automatically, just a couple of clicks, and now all the line 1s are lined up together, all the line 2s are lined up together, and so forth. It's very, very handy, very powerful tool for managing lyrics that way. And what you can do is, this song is completed. I added in some incompletion to it just to show some things, but when you're really early on working through a song and you're not sure what meter you should use, you can work on a verse. You can input the verse by itself, input your other verses, and then switch the arrangement to show all the lines next to each other, line 1.1, 2.1, 3.1, and so forth. Put all those together and see what's the most common out of all those. And lining them up side by side, you can identify where is it going to be easiest to reconcile these lines and get them the same? Where's going to be the most effective for the song? It's also very visual. It lines up one syllable per cell. And so you can see, and I have the columns numbered, you can see how many syllables there are per line. I also have some formulas that will count how many syllables are being used. You can insert blanks, leave a cell blank and know that a word or a syllable has to go there, and so forth. You can insert your X's and slashes to even indicate what accents should be on those syllables. But it lines everything up and it just makes it really obvious what you're doing. And you can even set it so that it pulls all those lyrics together or concatenates them and shows them all in a line, which is easier to read, as you see in column Q. But let's look at that actual Excel spreadsheet and I'll show you how that works. Okay, so here we have my lyrics worksheet for His Steadfast Love Endures Forever. And this shows the whole song except for the chorus, which I didn't include that here, but you could do that as well and just have a C for the verse column instead of a number. If you're not familiar with tables in Excel, here are some basic things. You would end up just typing in some lyrics and so forth. I'll just show you here. Just paste these in just to show a quick example of how to set this up. A little mini tutorial. I'm just going to put in the values there. So this is verse. This is our verse column. This is our line column. This is word 1, syllable 2, syllable 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then here's our rhyme scheme. This is our syllable count, and then this is the lyrics combined. And then what I can do is select all of this and then go to the home, format as table, and just pick a formatting. My table does have headers. That's those labels up there. And then hit OK, and now that's arranged. Then we'll jump back over here and we can talk about this some more. Okay, so that's a super quick explanation of how you can get started setting up the spreadsheet with your lyrics on it. You would just type those in. But here's the example of one that I've completely set up. Done some formatting to make it a little more visually, not appealing, but more visually organized by color and so forth. But in each column, I put one of the words with a space after it so that it can produce this line of text over here. But you can go through and then make the words bold that are emphasized. And you can see how those line up throughout a verse. But what's especially interesting is if I go up here to the line category, the line heading, and then sort smallest to largest, then I have verses 1 through 5, line 1 of each verse, and now I can see how all of those line up. Now, second word is emphasized, fourth word, sixth word, and the eighth word. In verse 2, line 1, I can see that I need 3 syllables to fill in here. To him, something who made the sky, and figuring out what to say there. Who wisely made the sky, and so you can go in, you can add a note, come in, right click, add a new comment where you can type in options. So if you're not settled on what it should be, you can type that in, but just put some placeholder text there and even show the emphasis there. So as you're working through it, you can see what kind of rhythm or meter to you have established. If you have it established, you can see what you need to fit there. And I ended up going with "To him whose wisdom made the sky." So if I type that in, whose, and then I tab over, I can get rid of this note here now. Just go there and delete that. Whose whiz, and then put the hyphen there, wisdom, and then space. You can see it's auto-populating over here. So if I want to just see what the lyrics look like, it looks like that. You can also, add extra columns for other notes or information about what alternate lyrics or complete lines might be there. If you're paying attention to the rhymes, I may want to switch back here to the verse 1. Go to verse, sort that smallest to largest, and see what the rhyme should be. Or verse 2, to him whose wisdom made the sky, have A. To him who hung the heavenly lights. It's not the strongest rhyme ever, but I was happy enough with it. But you can put, list out some rhyming words or just make other notes in the columns over there. You can add comments and so forth. But this is really useful because you can see just right off the bat that these have the same number of words in them, and you can even set it to calculate how many or syllables, the same number of syllables, how many syllables there are in that line. And then, of course, you can see if I switch back to the line organization that they all end in the same line. Okay, so that's a tool that I use. I really like using it when I get to this point. Before this point, I probably do more just typing it into some kind of note-taking or word processing type of software because it's easier to read, and really I'm focused on the words and the thoughts until we get to the point where we have to consider the rhythm and rhyme at the same time. Then it's helpful to have this visual layout of it. And finally, of course, the notation method would be using music. And ultimately, that's where this all has to lead for this to be a song and not just poetry. For writers who read music and can put this into music in some way, one nice thing is that it keeps the rhythm, the actual musical rhythm in front of you. And what you'll find is when your words are put to music, sometimes a difference in emphasis is a big deal. There's not really good alignment from verse to verse. Sometimes you'll find that the music doesn't necessarily emphasize all the emphasized syllables or doesn't especially de-emphasize syllables. So you can have a little bit of difference from one verse to the next in the same line, and it's not a big issue. But sometimes it is more disruptive. I have an example of a song here that I wrote the song, and I like it a lot, but there was one or two exceptions that I never found a better solution, so I just left it as is. But that doesn't mean that I'm happy with the solution that I kept. I just don't have a better one. But the song goes da 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 da. That's great for verses 1, 3, 4, and 5. 3, rise up and build in the strength of God's grace. It's not terrible. Rise up would be how you would say it. Rise up is okay. Verse 2, though, the cup you bear. It emphasizes the, which is absolutely not the word that we care about in the line. The cup you bear. It should be the cup you bear. I played around with other options like bearing a cup that overflows with your tears. Grammatically, it didn't work quite right with the other lines. And this is one of those times as a songwriter, you just have to make a choice. Do you go with what communicates better, what states what you want stated better? Maybe it's a word choice, maybe it's grammar, and sometimes there's just not a better option, and you're just left with what you have. And so that was the choice I made here. Rather than compromising the grammar or compromising the word choice, maybe somebody else could write a better line. At least to this point, I can't. So That's something to watch for, though, if you can catch it early on, and minimize those sorts of things where the music really emphasizes a word that shouldn't be emphasized. It sounds odd to be emphasized. Distracts from the message ultimately is the downside to it. With music notation, though, it's the most rigorous test of whether your words are fitting the rhythm and meter. But it can be very tedious if you need to make frequent or significant changes. If you're overhauling a whole verse or rearranging things or deciding, you know what, all these lines, first line, third line, they all need to be changed for the meter. It's a pain to do it in music notation software versus just retyping them in Microsoft Word or even redoing them in a spreadsheet. Those are all easier. So it's something that I usually wait to do until I feel pretty solid on, like, maybe 90% on the lyrics. And maybe there's a word or two that are still outstanding to be settled, and I'll go ahead and put it into music. And I'll do that so that I can determine whether I really like what my choices are, how sensitive is the music and the arrangement to that word choice. And you kind of have to do that to finalize everything. But you don't want to do it too early or it's just a pain to work with, in my opinion. One other thing I want to point out, and it's kind of tied to that topic, is awkward meter pairings or just poor arrangement of words, poor arrangement of lyrics for the given meter. If we go back to our example of Abide with Me and look at what would happen if we took those same 10 syllables of that first line and put them with the rhythm or the meter of other songs. Nominally, they are also 10 syllables, but does it work to switch them over? Let's see how that works out. So, Abide with Me with the original music would go, abide with me, fast falls the eventide. If we were to sing that to the tune of God of Our Fathers, we would have, abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. It's not too bad. It's a pretty good match. Maybe there's a little bit less emphasis on some of the syllables. Some of those would be kind of debatable anyway. Is abide two strong syllables or is it a strong weak syllable combination? Then, if we go to Be Thou My Vision, we have abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. So there, it's not a real great fit. In fact, you get some of these Lord with me abide. That accents a word that is not a highlighted word in the lyrics, whereas in Be Thou My Vision, it's not be not be all else to me save that thou art, or in the second verse, and thou with me, Lord. So it accents, be thou my vision, accents a certain word, and that's not the word to be accented in abide with me. Then, if we look at peace, perfect peace, we have abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. Now that's interesting because that's just a 2-line song, Peace, Perfect Peace. And although Abide with Me is a 4-line song, those first 2 lines fit very well, and it even resolves to a significant degree the lyrics and the music together. You could just take it like that. And those fit pretty well, but one thing that you'll notice is that peace, perfect peace, especially in that first line, is just, it's almost monotone. There's a little bit of rhythm, only the slightest change of melody, and that leaves the emphasis interpretation pretty open. So if you start off with it aligning reasonably well with the poetic meter, and then lay on top of that music that isn't just driving heavy accents, then you can combine those pretty well. And that's why it's important to, yes, start out with a good headway on having solid, consistent poetic meter from verse to verse, and then ultimately lining that up with music. But until you get the music with it, you won't really know how sensitive the combination is. Then finally, I want to point out just a little bit about music, because that is where this all connects. How are you going to do that? When you're writing your lyrics, feel free to use any music that you think could fit your song. That doesn't mean you'll be able to use that music. It may be under copyright, and you may not have permission to use that in combination with your lyrics and publish it or anything like that. But it can be a background essentially in your mind, or even when you're singing it just by yourself or whatever. You can use that music as a background for your lyrics. Think about what music you're using. If it's like a country song or a heavy metal song or something like that, or a rap song or rap, those may not translate well to the kind of song that you want to be producing. But sometimes they might, because there is definite rhythm to them, and they're going to follow the rules of music. Even if the music and the arrangement and even, accompaniment or whatever doesn't match, there's potential for that to be useful. That being said, if you're using a song that has a lot of instrumentation in it, sometimes what happens is there are significant breaks in the singing, and they're filled in with instruments, and that translates to rhythms and meter that don't exist in the lyrics. And when your songs are going to be sung a cappella, that doesn't match up one to one in lyrics and music, or even music to what will be sung. And that can create for some awkward things later. But assuming all of that's in order, feel free to use any music. If you use something that's arranged for congregational singing, that's going to be probably a pretty solid starting point for music that you can use for reference as you write. But as we pointed out, if it has the same meter and in certain cases has rhythms that are compatible and time signatures that are compatible and so forth, you can use different music later if that other music has the same meter. Later, once your lyrics are ready to set to your final music, you can source your music from the public domain of music. Essentially, what we're talking about here has to do with copyright law. If it's been written in the last 95 years, then it's still under copyright, and you would need permissions from the composer or possibly the publisher or copyright holder to use that music in combination with your words, and especially to put it down on paper or digitally and use that in singing with other people. When you're just singing to yourself, you can sing to whatever you want, but to publish it or perform it, to put it into print, any of those things, you have to avoid violating someone's copyright. The nice thing is about older songs written 96 years ago or older, so in 2023, that would be songs written in 1927 or before, you can use that music freely. It's open for anyone to use. There's no royalties to pay. There's no permissions to seek. You can just use that music. And you can usually find that if you're looking in a hymnal, the music's already arranged for people to sing, and you can look in the copyright info. If it doesn't include it in the printing of the song, then it may be implied that that's public domain, but you got to weigh your risk there as to whether you just take that assumption. It would depend on the hymnal and how they notate things. If it says copyright 1902 or just has a date that it was written then you should be good to go. With that in mind, though, there are arrangements that are newer. It may be an old song, maybe centuries old songs, but there are newer arrangements of that, and those arrangements may be copyrighted. So you have to watch out for that as well. It would usually be in a copyright notice along with the song. Another option is to write the music yourself. Understand that is a significant undertaking. Writing a melody, some people have a knack for it. Some people don't. They can sing a song and they can sing it to a melody, and it may work for them. And if that's your goal, then and that works for you, go for it. But writing melodies that are singable by congregations of untrained musicians or non musicians, actually, things need to be simple. They need to be easily accessible. And it takes a certain talent and skill to be able to write effectively for that target audience for music. But you may be able to do that. That's definitely outside the scope of this workshop, which is focused on lyrical writing. But all writers of music started somewhere. And so if you're interested in doing that, then you can get started. And your first few efforts may not be the greatest, and that's okay. But just keep after it and practice, get feedback, take that feedback into consideration. If somebody says it's really hard to sing, then you need to do it differently if you want it to be easier to sing. You can't just tell them, well, it should be easier. It's on you as the writer to make it singable by the audience that you're shooting for. So it is a significant undertaking. Writing the melody is one thing, and then arranging it for the various parts is another thing. I'm no expert in it. I write my own music and arrange it and do a little, just a very little bit of arranging for other people. I'm by no means an expert and no means predictable in whether it will be singable or not, but it can be done anyway. Another alternative is to find someone to write music for your song. And this is something that you want to watch out for right up front, or keep this in mind. When you're writing lyrics, if you're in the live workshop with me, then I am happy to write original music for your words if you want. But if you're not involved in that workshop and you're just viewing this online, then I don't know your resources. I don't know the people that you know and whether you know someone who is capable of writing music for your song. I would just ask for their sake to consider this, that it takes a significant amount of effort for someone to write music. And especially, it takes a lot of effort if the lyrics are not written well for music. They can be beautifully written and say beautiful things in beautiful ways, but it's a different thing than to have them in such a rhythm and arrangement that music works easily with it, especially if it gets away from something very simple or something very common. If it's a very common type of meter, you can probably find something in the public domain. And if it works with that and you still want original music, then whoever's writing that music can reference that and know, okay, maybe that's the style they're going for, or these rhythms work. But if it works with a variety of public domain melodies, then it's very reasonable that someone could write new music for it. Although at that point it does become somewhat less critical to being able to share your song for people to sing it. But if you want someone to write music for your song, understand that it does take a lot of effort for them. So your lyrics should be worth it. And you should consider whether it is worth asking that person for that favor, and consider your lyrics and whether they're ready for that level of effort to accompany them. And understand that some people are wonderful writers of music, and the better they are, probably the more requests they get, and it's likely more than they can take on. And so they may have to be selective, and don't be disappointed if they don't select your lyrics to work with. But be patient, and probably you can find one of these ways to get your song to where you can sing it. But at this point, you're focusing on rhythm. And so what you want to consider is, am I doing something now in my rhythms and my meter that will be easily translated into music later? If you're inconsistent from verse to verse, it will be a nightmare to write music for it. If the number of syllables is not the same, it's going to be tough. And even if music is written for it and it's accommodated somehow, where sometimes there's two syllables in a place and sometimes there's one, even if the music can handle it, it will be difficult for singers because they're expecting consistency from verse to verse. And when it's inconsistent, it trips you up. So watch out for that. Try to avoid it, but I would say don't sacrifice the quality of the hymn for getting that consistency, unless that inconsistency is such a distraction. It's so egregious that it would be better to take inferior word choice that would be less distracting or something like that. You just have to weigh those trade-offs and try to get the most effective song in combination of ease of singing and quality of lyrics that you can get. As I pointed out previously, there was a line in one of my songs that every time I sing it, I cringe, but I haven't found a better way yet, so I'm just leaving it with that for the time being. My biggest suggestion would just be to find some music that exists right now And if your lyrics can work with it, then it's going to be something that can be set to music, even different music later. That's it for the lesson. Assignment number 11 is to refine the rhythm of your draft. Your last assignment was to write your first draft. Hope you got through that. Even if it's rough, you didn't know what you're doing with the rhythm or even rhyme, which we'll cover next time. You've got your draft, and so now it's time to start ironing out the meter and the rhythm. Focus on finding a meter and a rhythm. Get one for one verse and then ignore it, and then write one for another verse and then ignore that one and write it for another verse. Figure out the meter independently and then see how they can line up. And if you need to, use a spreadsheet and get those things lined up, or just type out the poetic meter off to the side with the X's and slashes. But just try to start seeing where they settle out. You may not know which one is going to carry through. In fact, in our workshop today, we were talking about how to approach that. It might be that when you work out your rhythm, it turns out it's easier to change 3 verses to match one than to find the right solution for that one, because it's a really tough one to change. That may be the case, or maybe it's just, okay, I've got to work on one to match the other 3. They're already locked in, they look great. Don't want to change them. I'm going to work on this one. It's just an iterative process. It's a back and forth process, working from one verse to another, bouncing back and forth and seeing kind of where they average out. Keep in mind that the more regular and consistent your meter is from verse to verse, and even within a verse, if your lines are repetitive or very similar in rhythm, make them exactly the same in rhythm. Don't randomly change it on the fly unless if it seems like it will be unpredictable. Try to get that consistency. So vertical consistency from verse to verse within the same lines. Verse 1, line 1, verse 2, line 1, get those things the same. And then horizontal consistency. If you establish a particular rhythmic pattern or metrical pattern, don't deviate it just a tiny bit. Make it a deliberate change if it changes, but don't just randomly vary it, because that will be surprising and people will never know what's coming next. We're not just talking about the number of syllables from verse to verse, but the emphasis or the rhythm within those lines. The way that I would approach this, and when you're working out the rhythm, the first thing you need to do before you start figuring out what should the meter or the musical rhythm be, just say the line. Say it without intentional rhythm, just like you're talking to somebody. You're giving a lesson, or you're just speaking it. Where's the emphasis? And then say it again, but do it overly, dramatically, and see where the emphasis is there. See if it changes. And that's just a technique to identify where the emphasis is without the bias of where you kind of want it to be to fit a particular rhythm. The closer it can be to just natural spoken language and the emphasis, the less distracting it will be compared to if the song and the rhythm and the meter are unnatural. That's it for lesson 11 on the Young Writers hymn writing series. I want this series to be useful, so please leave feedback in the comments. Next time will be lesson 12, talking about rhyming and thinking about how that affects our songs and what is a good rhyme, what isn't a good rhyme, how do we balance rhyming and word choice and rhythm, and combining all that together. Then after that, our final lesson will just be on polishing up and how to approach that activity. Until then, may the words of your mouth and the meditation of your heart be acceptable in the sight of the Lord.